Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Consistent Creators, a show where I sit down with inspiring creators that have been creating consistently on the internet. The goal of the show is actually to sit down with these people whose work I find inspiring, and so that we can all learn from their journey. So today I have Jordan Hughes with me. Jordan is a designer and a creator based in Melbourne, Australia. He very recently moved to Melbourne. He was in Sydney before that. Jordan is someone whose work I have followed on the internet for some time now. And I really like the aesthetic vibes of his design. They are very clean, realistic, and functional. That I would say that's the key part of his designs, because a lot of times when you see the designs that are on Dribble, it's just made for visual pleasure. But when you look at Jordan's design, you can immediately say that this has been made by a professional for a real app. And I really take inspiration from that. Jordan he has recently co-founded a remote jobs app called Himalayas. And he's also the creator of Untitled UI. We are going to learn a lot about Untitled UI and UI kits in general from the show. So Jordan, welcome to Consistent Creators. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to finally meet you. We were chatting before we started recording. We've both been following each other and we've been internet friends for some time now. So it's kind of surreal to chat face to face for the first time and really nice. I will preface this with just a thanks to you for putting all this time into your newsletter and into this new Consistent Creator series. Congrats on getting the .com domain name as well. Yeah, it's really great to have people like you in the community who actually put the effort into these things and help share people's experiences. And I'm sure your audience can learn a few things from your videos as well, which is really fantastic.
Thanks a lot for the kind words, Jordan, and I can absolutely say the same thing for you. So Untitled UI is actually something that has been very useful to me as well. So for someone who has used a lot of design kits in his design career, I can clearly say that the Untitled UI is one of the best design kits that are available out there. And these days, I don't actually create a lot of UI design work. And at my work, GraphCMS, we also have our design system. But the way that I use Untitled UI is because it's such a comprehensive resource. I kind of started using it as a inspiration board because it has so many different patterns for a particular UI that you would want. And just looking at something which is already functional, and also the way that you have created components, I can go inside and I can reverse engineer it. That is something that is how I actually like to use Untitled UI. Anyways, apologies. I should have asked you before to give an introduction, like a proper introduction. But we just jumped straight into it because it was so exciting.
Of course.
So the stage is yours. I would like to know more about you and your journey so far.
Yeah, of course. Well, you pretty much summed it up in your introduction. Based down in Melbourne, in Australia, I only really got into design a couple of years ago. In fact, before I got into design, I was more of an operations role, working in startups in Sydney, which I really enjoyed. I really love working in high-paced startup environments, where things are a bit scrappy and, you have to grow really fast and figure out problems on your own. You're not relying on a huge team. So I was always interested in design. And then let's say mid to late 2019, I read a book by the guys behind Tailwind called Refactoring UI, which was kind of I don't know if you've heard it before.
But it's one of my favorite books. I recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, it's really great. And that kind of led me down a path of reading some other design books when I was thinking about getting into design. And that one has really stood out for me and probably made the biggest impact in my career in terms of technical skills and design skills. It's written actually for developers. So as an operations guy, I kind of really loved how it was broken down into these are the best practices. This is why it's this way. And this is, how we suggest that you approach these problems. It starts with real foundational stuff like typography and how to make your designs just look not as bad, if that makes sense. So I think a lot of time with new designers, and when I was starting out, I'd design a web page and then couldn't quite put my finger on why it doesn't look as good as other websites that I was seeing, right? And this book really helped me to kind of break that down. So, you know, as I mentioned, I wanted to get out of ops. It was high paced and stressful, and I found it was really hard to like differentiate myself in terms of my career path on that route as well. And I'd always been more interested in design and wanted to get into more of that kind of stuff. So my first and only real design job was for this massive enterprise SaaS company based in Sydney as well. They have an office in the US. And it's quite a large software, right? They're used by some massive multinationals, NASA, the New York Stock Exchange. And I started there because a good friend of mine and someone who I really admire had started working there, and who was heading up the marketing, and he invited me on board and really took a chance on me. And I feel like the more senior managers that can do that on junior designers, the better, because, you know, he wanted to give me a real shot and knew that I was keen to learn and keen to transition in design, and gave me a lot of autonomy to kind of upskill and learn and as on the job as I went. And when I started there, I can't thank him enough for that. His name's Kaushik. So shout out to Kaushik if you ever listen to this. Yeah, really, really changed my life and my career path. For the second time, actually, he actually hired me in my first startup job as well. Again, he took a massive chance on me, and hopefully it paid off, I guess. So anyway, I'm going on a tangent. I started at this cybersecurity SaaS company, and they hadn't had a designer for quite some time before me. They had a design team, you know, a couple of years ago, and that didn't work out. So what had happened was it was this massive, intensely complicated product, and they'd just been layering features on with little to no thought of UX and like consistency. So as you can imagine, it was quite a large ship to turn, and I kind of broke it down from like, you know, took a more of an operational approach to it. Okay, we've got all these problems. You know, each page on the app isn't consistent. That's fine. We can just work through these one by one. So each time the dev team working on like a new feature, I'd always try to slip in, while we're here, do you mind if we fix up the button hierarchy on this page? And while we're doing that, on every page. And then it just became a matter of improving it 1%. And that was kind of my first introduction to design systems and setting up these consistent foundational components, you know, as part of a component library, and making sure those match exactly to what's in the dev environment. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, it was a very slow process. The first year was spent pretty much just like making sure typography and like rebuilt the website and webflow for them as well, like the marketing site. And there was a lot of work, so it was a steep learning curve. And around that same time, I started working on the idea for Himalayas with a few friends of mine. I had a few other side projects as well, but none that are really worth mentioning. And I kind of saw the same problem that could have happened to Himalayas if we didn't get on top of it right from the start. So I started building out like a Figma component library, and making sure everything's consistent. So it's not a matter of restricting your decisions, like we have to use this component. It's a matter of, you know, tackling each problem as it comes. So the first time you have to figure out, okay, what does our nav look like? Iterate on it 100 times, but once you're happy with it, componentize that and then make it into a library. So then in future, there's like a single source of truth. And then we know that, okay, this is how it's done. This is how it behaves. Then every page of the app, then it just behaves the same way. And that really, you know, echoed with me, because coming from like an operational background, I really liked those setting up those procedures and making sure, you know, when we onboarded new people, or if new people joined the team, or even like new designers, you would have experienced this as well. You know, I know that you're growing Graph CMS and hiring new designers. You kind of need to have these systems in place, otherwise it's just a mess. And it becomes a problem, not initially, but down the track, when you have all these inconsistencies that you have to solve, right? So that becomes a problem. And then not just a problem for designers, but if the designers can't get it right at the design stage, then the devs aren't going to get it right. So it builds up what I call like this design and technical debt. And it's this opportunity cost where later on down the track, the devs are going to be focusing all their time and fixing all these little problems that should have been fixed right from the start, when they could have been working on like making features better, or like working on new features for customers, which, you know, gets real expensive because dev time's expensive. So yeah, something I'm really passionate about is getting this stuff right from the start. And if you need to make changes down the track, that's totally fine. Like things change and you may decide that this component needs to behave differently, and that's totally fine. All you have to do at that point is just change it in one spot. And then once it's implemented on the dev side, then that's fixed. It's fixed everywhere. So yeah, from there, Himalayas was a really great opportunity for me to like build a foundational system from scratch from the start. And that became the basis of Untitled UI. It kind of grew as a component library. I branched it off and started adding more components that we weren't using in Himalayas as well in my spare time. And it just grew in size. And then I always had this inkling in the back of my mind that I wanted to sell it as a product. And after I poked around the market to see what other UI kits are like to get inspiration and what the best selling products are, it became pretty apparent that they lacked both in scale and quality as well. Like they just weren't built very well. So that was a good inspiration for me to like kind of double down on this stuff and make it really great. So I worked on it for quite a long time, and then once I was happy that it was ready to be released, I released it, and I think it's been received pretty well. And I'm continuing to work on it. Like I love working on this stuff, so it's really fun to work on, and it's really useful because it's kind of been built in parallel with what we're doing at Himalayas as well. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing on Untitled translates really well into Himalayas, and we have stuff ready to go so we can build and iterate really fast. Yeah, that's pretty much my story. I spend most of my time in Himalayas these days. The second big chunk of my time just goes towards playing golf every day. And then when I have some spare time, I just usually chip away at Untitled in the evenings. Yeah, I didn't mean to talk for that long, but I hope that kind of sums up my journey. Yeah.
It's already actually gave me a lot of points to talk about.
Awesome.
I'd like to uncover a few things from your introduction. But before that, I would like to also share that I can relate a lot with your approach here as well. When I joined Graph CMS, so I was their first designer. They did not have a designer before that, and because of that, like we didn't really have any design in place. So while I started working on the features, we always had the idea that at some point we want to start building a design system. But the approach that I was taking was, if I have to build a design system, I have to first understand like how the design is built, right? Like what does the design language of the product look like? So once I start working on some features and I touch a few places in the application, I would get that understanding. And while I'm doing that, I would also keep on correcting. Like I'm now making design improvements as well. And I took the exact same approach as you. So whenever I touch something, even if like imagine I just needed to create like a simple settings page, but while I'm doing that, all the other things that are there on that setting page, I will also start improving that, because that's the best time that you can do that, right? Otherwise it would just get backlogged and maybe never really picked up. So while I'm working on that, I was also making those updates. And once I had made enough updates or made enough improvements, I started creating component library out of that. So that is how the design system, that is how the work on the design system of Graph CMS actually started. So I can definitely draw a lot of parallels from your story. And one thing that I also want to understand is that you mentioned that early on in your career, when you were working in operations, you came across Refactoring UI. I'm curious if Refactoring UI is the book that actually made you decide that you wanted to start a career in design. And is that when your design career actually started?
That's a good question. No, I was definitely thinking about it, and I can't remember if I'd already made the decision to switch over to design at that point. I think it was just really good for me to read because it kind of broke design down into systems, and it kind of removed this illusion that designers are artists, or some designers are, but for product design and web design, a lot of the problems that we're solving have already been solved by other people, and there's no point like reinventing the wheel for how a drop down behaves, right? Design, UI design and modern UI design, there are like best practices for how to do things. And, as a beginner, all you kind of have to do is like take the same approach as you took with designing Graph CMS and their component libraries. Like just approach problems one by one and be like, okay, I need to do this checkbox. So what are the best practices for building checkboxes? And somebody else much smarter than me has already solved that problem. So like, okay, that's like how it's done now. And every product you use pretty much does it that way. As users, you kind of get familiar with those patterns, and there's no reason to break that just for arbitrary reasons, right? There's no reason to go full send on like a different style of checkbox and make it behave differently just for the sake of being different. And, those kind of things, the design decisions just should be consistent with, what other great design companies are already doing in the market. So that was just circling back to the question. I was going to say that book was really good for me because it kind of opened my eyes to like all design is just like rules and systems and making a product as easy to use as possible for the user. I know it sounds really cliche, but I'm always amazed by how many like professional designers that I've met that just ignore that stuff and just like go completely out on a tangent and just design really weird and wacky ways of doing things when like the problem's already been solved. And it's almost like they're designing this in a silo, like not looking at what other people are doing already. Some would call it cheating. I think it's just like best practice to just look at what other people are doing really well and just essentially copy them because they've already figured this out. Users are already used to it. There's no point in like reinventing the wheel. So,
Wow, you must have seen me nodding to a lot of things while you're
yeah.
talking. All these things that you have mentioned, well, it could be controversial for some people, but these are the things that I also 100% believe. And I'm just
Yeah.
glad that you are taking this approach. And it's also very fascinating to me that you did not have like you did not have enough design experience to realize these things. I think right from the get-go, you had a very clear understanding of how you want to design. And all these principles and methods that you're talking about, usually it takes a lot of time for people in their design careers to realize these things. So kudos to you on that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is, a lot of the things I've said, that there's a best way of doing each component. A lot of it is subjective still. There are like different stylistic choices that you can make. But at a foundational level, like you shouldn't really mess with button hierarchy and like how buttons behave. They should have a hover interaction and they should look like buttons. And it's a lot of, to me, it was just common sense. And I think that was a really relief for me to read that book because it kind of broke it down into that, and it all made sense and it all kind of clicked into place. And I wouldn't call myself a great designer at all. Like I simply just lean on others who are great designers who have already figured out these problems. And I think that's like, as a beginner, anyone who's like starting out designer, I always send them a link to that book to buy because it's the link's down in the description if anyone's interested. But I always send them a link to that book because I'm like, look, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but this book helped a lot. So I think you should read it. And it's not long and it's pretty pictures in it. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to link that book over here. I wish they had an affiliate program so that in that way I would have gotten some affiliate commission out of it. But
Yeah.
no, it's a book that a lot of times people who are starting out in design or who are early in their career, they reach out to me asking like how they can actually get better at UI because they struggle quite a lot with UI in the beginning. And I always have one answer for them that start with refactoring UI. The cost point of the book is quite high. Like it's not a cheap book. So for someone who's starting early, especially if they are in a developing country like India, it becomes a little bit
Yeah.
expensive, but the investment is 100% worth it. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and the result is actually in front of you. So I'm talking to you who is like the shining example of what you can do when you read books like this.
I wouldn't call myself a shining example, but a good way to frame it, and I love thinking about this with UI kits as well, is like if you think it's going to save you 10 hours work, and in reality, it's probably going to save you hundreds or thousands of hours of work that you would have otherwise had to figure this stuff out through trial and error or like reading a bunch of different articles on each subject. If it's going to save you, at least a dozen hours, then it's definitely worth the investment in the long run because you can skip all those headaches and all that pain trying to figure all that stuff out later on if you have like a really good foundational understanding of how everything works.
Yeah. There are a few things that I would like to uncover about the story of Untitled UI. But before we get
Sure.
into that, how about you tell us what Untitled UI is in your own words?
Oh, okay. Well, I I kind of started Untitled UI as my intention for it anyway was for it to be like a foundational component library for like freelancers or like startups to kind of take and then just go through and like look at everything and then delete the stuff that they know they won't need. So it's kind of like a head start on building your own component library. And there's a lot of misconceptions about UI kits. And I think a part of this comes from a lot of the UI kits in the market, they're very opinionated. So they already have like too much design and stylistic choices kind of built in. And my approach with Untitled was to kind of build like this foundational UI kit, which is a massive library. Like it's the largest UI kit on the internet that I know of. And the whole point is to start with this base and then just go through and remove the stuff you don't need and keep the stuff that you do. And then the stuff that you do keep, then customize it to your heart's desire. Like if you want to make it closer to the brand that you're going after, then that's fine. The point is that like a lot of the work's already done for you. Hopefully, the components are built well as well, so you won't have to go back and redo everything from scratch. Yeah, and I kind of see it as like a way to kickstart new projects. So, when I start a new project, I'll make a copy of it, go through and like, if I know that I won't need any of the marketing site components, I'll just simply delete all those pages, and it makes the kit a lot lighter and less to work with. And then I'll go through and like customize the colors, customize the typography, and everything kind of updates. And just from that, those couple of hours investment from the start, I've saved myself potentially thousands of hours of work, because I don't have to go back and build all these foundational components from scratch. I don't have to build like a button component from scratch. It's already kind of done. It's, some people prefer starting from start on each new project, but if you want to iterate quickly and like not have to figure out this stuff as you go, I think it's a good head start. Yeah, so that's in a summary, it's the world's largest UI kit and design kit in Figma, and it's supposed to be like a Kickstarter for new projects. I didn't make an Adobe XD or Sketch version for it because I've never used those software. That's the real answer. But also because Figma just has such a huge market share now, and it is the best platform. And if you disagree with that, that's fine. Just know that you're wrong. Figma's better. Figma's live. And I love using Figma. Like when I started learning how to use it, it really blew my mind how powerful it is and how great it is to use. And it was also a really good experience from a UX perspective as well, like how they approach problems. It's such a complex software.
I'm so glad that you actually invested all of your efforts in creating this UI kit for Figma, because what that has allowed you is to make it as comprehensive as you could. And Figma is a tool that I use for literally everything now. Yeah. Whenever I have something that I want to design, no matter if it's graphics or UI or design system or anything, it's just my go-to choice. I'm currently also working on an ebook or a Notion resource. A lot of that work is also going to happen inside Figma. And because you have created this UI kit inside Figma, it's just very easier for me to use as well. I also want to understand, so with a lot of UI kits, as you mentioned, that they are kind of opinionated. What happens is that if you already have a visual language that you've established, like you're not really looking to change the aesthetics or the UI or the visual direction of the UI that you created, in that case, would UI kit like Untitled UI would be of any help, and what would be the best way to use it?
It's a good question. I kind of experienced this problem when I was trying to solve, building a kit for an existing product, the product that already existed at my previous job. And I think like the best way to approach it is to address each decision as a case-by-case basis, and either stick with what you've got or completely switch to whatever the UI kit is suggesting, or some kind of compromise. So you tweak the UI kit. So, the obvious ones are like typography. So if you already have an existing product, an existing website, chances are your typography scale and your typography system is going to be very, very different to what is in a pre-made UI kit. And that's totally fine. There's a few ways you can approach it. You can either update your existing website to match the UI kit, or, probably the more common sense way is to just update the UI kit with, existing style typography system, and just making those two things consistent. And then moving on to like brand colors and stuff like that. Yeah, I think a lot of people fall into the trap a little bit, and I need to do a better job of this, of explaining it. When they start from a UI kit, they think that they're like Lego blocks that you can't customize at all. But my intention was to provide the foundations, and then you to run with it and make it your own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can tell you from my personal experience that how I have used UI kits. I've actually used UI kits in like while I was working with some of my clients as a consultant. And also actually at one of the startups that I was working early on in my career. I have used UI kits over there as well, and the result, when you see the result of what I created, it is not going to look anything close to the UI kit that I used. So you wouldn't be able to tell that it has been created from a UI kit.
Yeah.
But the way that the UI kits help me is that I think of it uh, like a head start. So what happens is that when you are staring at a blank screen, it can get very intimidating, and it's very difficult to start if you don't have anything at all. And in that case, this is actually the case where UKit comes into picture. So imagine if you have a skeleton ready, or like you have some patterns that you could refer to, then you're focusing on the features at that point. You're not really focusing a lot on the UI. And slowly, as you keep on developing that, you would start adding your own elements. Like, so you would add elements like you would be changing the colors, the type of, you could update the typography. Maybe you're also updating the spacing, the the patterns that you're using. You might also update that. But what the UI kit is actually going to do is it has already set up the base and the foundation for you. So expanding on that becomes much more easier, because it's always like when you give someone something which is already like in a half-baked state, it's much more easier for them to build on top of it and actually completely bake it. But if you just tell them to start entirely from scratch, then it can be very intimidating, especially if you're early in your career and you don't have enough experience with UI, because UI is something that only comes with practice. I tell this to everyone that UI is just a matter of practice. The more deliberately you practice, the more work you do, the more hours that you spend in these tools, you're going to get better at UI. And there's no other way that you can get better at it, because it's not, a lot of times you think that what happens is that you can develop the taste for the UI quite easily. So you would know if something is good or not. You would be able to tell that. Especially if you're working in tech, you're seeing so many products. You can tell a good product from a bad product because you have been exposed to so many better looking products, right? But when you actually start creating that, now that is where the whole mess up happens, because your skills are not reached to the level where you can actually create what you're seeing. But when you're seeing something, you already know it's good. So whenever you create something, this is also the problem that a lot of designers have, because that taste level is already on a very high level. And when they create something which is not on the same level, they feel the work is shit, and they are always complaining about their work. Like, they created something today, they would feel like they're the king of the world, and they see the same work after 5 or 6 days, and they are like, "What is this garbage? I'm such a terrible designer." And I think maybe that's also maybe one of the reasons that designers keep on updating their portfolio for no good reason. Sometimes it's also just to flex their creative muscles, but a lot of times it's also because they don't like what they created before. Anyways, I think I went on a little bit of a tangent over here. But coming back to the Untitled UI topic, help me understand, how did it actually came into be? So when you were working on Himalayas app, so you're one of the co-creators of it, right?
Yep.
So when I look at the Himalayas app, it actually looks quite similar than what you have in Untitled UI. Like, and I think that's also the signature style that you have. So was it, did you, at any point, did you ever consider that your application should not look closer to Untitled UI, or did you have this in your mind that you wanted the UI kit to look very different and the application to look different, or you did not mind it at all? Like, how was that decision making over there?
That's a good question. Structurally, that they're very similar in terms of like my design decisions, like spacing and stuff like that, button components. But it's kind of like that final layer of paint, so to speak, that like really sets it apart. So if you break down the foundations of both of them, Untitled UI and Himalayas, a lot of design decisions are exactly the same. Just keeping those consistent in terms of like badge sizes and how drop downs work and everything. But then on the Himalayas side, you get to kind of take a step further and apply like the CSS to it. So changing out the typeface that we use and the color palette and everything. And there are a lot of things in the Himalayas library that we had to create from scratch, like the job board cards and everything. They're a little bit more complicated than things in Untitled UI. So they're kind of like, at this point, they've kind of diverged a little bit. With Untitled, I just wanted to keep it as neutral as possible, is a good word to describe it. I think you summed it up really well, where you kind of want to have that skeleton to start from, and it just allows you to build on that. So yeah, it kind of started out of necessity, really. As I said, I was working on a similar kit for my previous job, and then it just built on from there. At my previous job, the CTO made a decision to hire a second designer to kind of help me out a little bit. And the intention there was to hire a really senior designer to kind of come in that I could also learn from. So I was really excited about that idea. And I could focus a lot more of my time on building the marketing side to be as great as it possibly could be, and helping out the marketing guys, which I was really excited about as well, because I love working in Webflow. It's my favorite tool. I really enjoy working on marketing sites. Anyway, we interviewed a bunch of designers, and they ended up hiring this one guy who I actually vetoed, because he was a self-titled super senior designer, but when you look back at his work, the quality just wasn't there, and things just didn't add up. And I don't mean to speak badly of other designers, but it became pretty apparent that this guy was a bit of a phony, and he didn't know or didn't want to use a design system or component library. And we were halfway through implementing one, right? So to have someone come in and completely disregard the component library and build everything from scratch just made no sense to me. So I'm talking about simple things like a button hierarchy. He would just go on a full tangent and just make up his own way of doing things on every single page. It'd just be different. And that was pretty I got pretty disenchanted with it, to be honest. I'm getting real with you here. I'm not bitter about it at all. It was really surprising to me. Here's a senior designer and refused to learn or upskill to how to use a component library and be more consistent, when the number one priority at that point was making everything consistent, and making sure that the same typography is used on each day, on each page, and the same headers, heading sizes were different on every single page. And I was kind of we've already solved these problems. We're trying to get the app to be more consistent and a better user experience. And then, when you're designing without constraints, it kind of creates this paradox of choice, where you may have a million ways. If you want to choose what size font to use for something, you could either use what's on every other page, or it becomes quite constraining because you have too many decisions and you have to try to remember, what did I use in this other page, right? So anyway, I got very disenchanted with the whole project at that point, and just started focusing most of my time on the marketing side. And a lot of that kind of frustration kind of really spurred me on to make Untitled, because I saw how valuable it was to have this consistent component library and to actually implement one in a startup. And yeah, I just kind of got a bit carried away with it, to be honest. I've spent a little bit too much time on it, but my philosophy about creating digital products is that, there's so much competition for these things, whether you're writing an ebook or a newsletter, or trying to, promote your SEO course or a UI kit. There's no original ideas anymore. There are thousands of digital products out there, and so much noise in social media, that you really need to make whatever you're selling to be, 2x better than everybody else in terms of quality and also value as well, because people are really smart, and the internet is very transparent. You can compare products pretty easily. And if you're spending all this time investing all your spare hours outside of work into creating digital products, only to release it before it's ready, so to speak, then you're just wasting all your time, and it's not going to be able to compete with, if it's not up there in terms of quality. So yeah, I kind of held off and just quietly chipped away Untitled in the background, continued to do my day job at this company, but kind of lost faith in setting up this design system because it wasn't even being implemented. So I just focused all my time on the marketing side at that point. And then, yeah, once I was happy with Untitled, released it, and then it seemed to get a nice reception, which was really, gratifying for me.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I know that when situations like this happen, it's like a nightmare. You don't want to be in that situation. I'm sorry that happened to you,
Yeah.
but I think something brighter came out of it. So you actually started working on Untitled UI, which was great. So up until this point, could you tell us how has Untitled UI done in terms of numbers?
Yeah, I haven't shared this stuff publicly, but I figured if people are this far in the interview, then they kind of deserve to know. And I'm happy to be transparent about it.
Yeah, and it's fine. You can share what you would like to share. It's totally up to you.
I'm just refreshing the page. So launched in mid-September, and it's early Feb. I'm trying to do quick maths in my head. It's sitting at 140,000 USD today. So that's roughly works out to about 20 to 30 USD per month, which has far exceeded my expectations. And I actually left my job before I released Untitled UI because I just wanted to focus on Himalayas full time. So I accidentally, it's pure. I recognize there's a lot of luck in releasing digital products as well. I just happened to be lucky enough that it was, so to speak, successful. So, it's paying for my rent and everything now. And I know that digital products, they can be finicky and a lot of the times it's not sustainable. So I kind of don't take this for granted. And I kind of view Untitled as like a runway machine. So with every sale of Untitled, I have more time to spend on creating other side projects and spending more time on the Himalayas, which is really great.
Yeah, such a beautiful feeling when you get that email from Gumroad that you have your weekly payout, right?
Yeah.
I don't create that. I don't sell that many products, but there are very few tiny things that sometimes I sell. And every time I get that message, or when I get a message from an affiliate sale, it just gives like a different kind of joy to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's been what? Just about 5 months that you have created this, and it has already done 120K in sales, right? Which is a phenomenal success, and many congratulations on that. I think what you have created is
Thank
really
you.
beautiful, and it actually deserves more success than that. With Refactoring UI, I know that it's a wildly successful book, and also because of the price point, like it's quite expensive. But looking at the success of Refactoring UI and now looking at the success of Untitled UI, which was started because someone took a lot of inspiration from Refactoring UI, became a designer, brushed up their skills, and then started this. My wish for you actually is that if in if it surpasses the sales of Refactoring UI, that would be a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I think I read somewhere that Refactoring UI hit like $1 million in sales over its lifetime, which is probably quite a while ago now. And, hats off to those guys. They're the best in the industry in terms of development and design. And they've definitely inspired, me and many other people as well. And we use Tailwind to build Himalayas as well. So, you know, they definitely deserve all the success they've had. And it's nice to see them growing even faster this year.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about the internet is that there can be many winners. It's never a zero-sum game. You can
Yeah,
always learn something and you can build on top of it. And your success is just a result of that. Now let's get to the interesting part. I know that people
sure.
always get excited about the numbers. The reason why I asked you first about the numbers was because I wanted to get people listening to this excited. But now let's look at the work that actually went in creating this, and this is no easy job. It is almost like a full-time job, right? How much I know this might be difficult to estimate, but do you have any idea how much time that you must have spent creating Untitled UI, like the complete package?
That's a really good question. I will also just like to add with the sales. Like I know that seems like an exuberant number, and I think it's great. Really, like I couldn't be more happy that it's been successful. But I also recognize that I have been really lucky with the sales and everything, and then I know that it's not going to last forever. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind when creating digital products. Like it kind of keeps you humble and keeps you working hard on other projects as well, rather than putting all your eggs in one basket. In terms of like time spent, it was a lot of work, and it kind of went through phases when I was building it. My initial approach was to have an entire dark mode within the kit as well, but it quickly became apparent that that was just going to get way too out of hand, and it was getting up there in size really fast. And I do recognize that the kit probably is too big. I'm actually working on as of this moment, working on like another version of the kit, which is like 50% smaller. So all the same foundational components, but none of like the unnecessary variants and stuff that you probably won't need. And I think that'll be really good to kind of give away for free to people that have purchased it or will purchase in the future. So they have the option there. They can go with like the full kit with 10,000 components and variants, or they can go for the slimmer kit if they don't need that huge amount of components if they're starting a new project. So yeah, as I said, went through phases where I initially started with dark mode, realized that wasn't the right approach, so I had to go back through it, like rip all that stuff out, not start from scratch, but backtrack a little bit, and then decided that if I'm going to build out like web app and application components, I might as well do the marketing site components as well on there and have it as like an all-in-one kit. So that sent me down that path as well, which is really good. I actually really like working on marketing sites. I think they're a lot simpler than like product design and dashboards. They're a lot easier to do. You can be a bit more visually creative with them as well. Whereas dashboards and product design is a lot more about making sure it's as functional and usable as possible. In terms of estimations, I really have no idea, to be honest. Like, I kind of wish I tried to do some quick math, like back of the napkin math, before this interview, because I could probably work it out. But it was a good like 5 or 6 months from when I bought the domain name to when I actually released the product. But that includes all like the collateral and I made a video for it and stuff and built the website. That stuff didn't take too long, but it definitely added up, and it was just a matter of consistently trying to fit in 2 to 4 hours every day of working on it outside of work and other commitments. And that stuff adds up. There's kind of two ways. I kind of see there's 2 ways of working. There's like deep focused work, or there's shallow work, borrowing the terms from this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. So when I am working on these things, I have to make sure that I'm actually working on them, not just like faffing around. And then that kind of focused intensity allows you to get a lot more done in like a short period of time. So as long as I fit in like at least a couple of hours of like deep work, usually early in the morning, working on Untitled, then the rest of the day was easy because I'm like, I've already done my work for the day. I've done a lot of work on Untitled today, so I'm like 1 step closer to releasing that. And then I could focus the rest of my time on Himalayas or my full-time job when I was working full-time.
Yeah, sorry to put you in a tough spot, mate. I know that it's very difficult to answer this question because I have also been working on some projects which are by the very definition, they are called side projects and they're always on the side. So you're not really dedicating, like it's not like a job where you are dedicating a certain amount of time. In that case, it would be very easy to estimate that.
Yeah.
But I think you have done a very good job of summing that up. Now, I really want to understand that when you work on projects like this, where you don't really have any deadlines, like the only deadline that you might have, which would be a self-imposed deadline that you would put on yourself, right? Like the world is not asking that give me Untitled UI until it's actually out. So the only deadline that you would have would be the one that you put yourself. And in this kind of situations, it can become very difficult to keep up with the motivation. So this is very common with side projects. Like whenever people have idea, they get very excited about it because we all like flashy new stuff. But when we start working on it, like we have all the energy in the world. But slowly, as and when we start working on it, our energy kind of drains off, and then it's very difficult to keep that motivation, and that's where most of the side projects go to die. But you were able to work on this project for such a long time, and I think you're only dedicating like 1 or 2 hours a day, and then you were also doing deep work in that time. How did you actually manage to do that? How did you keep yourself motivated?
It's a really good question as well. I think my main motivation for building Untitled and Himalayas, I wish it was more altruistic than this, but it was simply just came down to I didn't want to work full time anymore. I kind of was getting very sick of having to deal with, being in meetings 4 hours a day and just being drained at the end of the workday, but also just being tied down to that commitment. So that was my primary motivation, which is as good as a motivator than any. And then I wouldn't say I'm inherently more motivated to like see these projects out, but I think a good way to approach it is to like break it down into habits. And, I vastly underestimated how much work was involved in creating Untitled. I thought it would be a month project, couple of months at most, and I would have it out. So I think that all tends to happen with projects. Like you kind of underestimate how much work you'll actually have to put in. But if you just dedicate like an hour or so a day and set up those consistent habits, then it becomes less about motivation and more about habit and focus. And when you combine those two, habits and focus, it's a pretty powerful force multiplier. So if you can like consistently just commit an hour a day of like focus time to it, it's not a huge commitment. Once you get started, it's fine. And then, with large projects like this, it can be pretty overwhelming. So I find it really helpful to just break it down into like bite-sized pieces. So I just had a simple Google sheet where if I thought, oh, it'd be good to have this component, I'll just add it to this spreadsheet and then forget about it. And then day by day, I'd open the spreadsheet and think, okay, I'll tackle this today. And when you break it into the smaller pieces and split it up into like a consistent routine, then it's not so daunting anymore. And you can see yourself. Another benefit of that is you can also see yourself making progress as well, because you're actively crossing things off the list. So it's like, okay, it's a bit of a pain to have to like dedicate every morning to this, but I can see myself making progress, and eventually I'll get to the end. And it might take longer than you expect, but if you just kind of instill those habits from the start, it becomes really easy. I sound a bit like James Clear now because I read Atomic Habits by James Clear a couple of years ago, and that made a huge impact on me. And I read that every year now. And that kind of stuff just compounds, right? So you can apply it to anything in your life, like fitness or investing or more professional endeavors like this, where if you just consistently show up every day and just like put an hour or two in, then you're going to outwork anybody else that doesn't have those habits, because they will, if they're just relying on their willpower and their motivation, they're just going to give up eventually. But if you consistently like chip away at it, you'll just wear them down eventually, and no one will be able to outwork you.
Yeah, the moment you started talking about habits, I knew that it would be James Clear. Because very recently, so I'm not really much of a book reader. It's very hard for me to commit to a book, but give me articles and newsletters in short form, and I would actually consume a lot of it. So if I compare the amount of things that I'm reading on internet, like tweet threads and long form blogs and newsletters, I read them religiously. And it would actually equate to a lot of books. And James has just started this thing called as 30 Days of Habit, where he's actually sending out one lesson every day. And
awesome.
I'm actually reading those lessons and those chapters from that email, because now he's sending that to me in the form of a newsletter. And once it shows up in my email, I'm an inbox zero person. My inbox is always completely dead. I have no notifications. And when I subscribe to something and it shows up in my mailbox, I'm going to be sure that I will read that, and that is how I have actually been reading that. So I can very much relate to that. Now, when you put this in a way that you just did, it sounds very easy. That set up a habit, work for some time in the morning, and you'd see the progress. But when you actually sit down to execute that, it's not that easy. And also, the other thing is that you're not immediately seeing any rewards, or you're not really seeing any success or anything that is going to give you that dopamine hit out of this, right? Because while you were working on it, you had no idea if this would become a successful product. You had no idea if other people were actually asking for it. By the way, that reminds me, I'm kind of curious that while you were creating Untitled UI, were you also seeking out feedback, and were you actually sharing this with some other people? And while building this, did you create any mechanism where you are actually getting this feedback and you're sourcing all this information? Because what you have created is something that people need. And for someone to create that, you have to do a lot of research in the background as well. So I'm very curious, like, how did you do the research work, or how did you get feedback on that?
That's a really good question as well. Short answer is I didn't, to be honest. I think a lot of it's like, and I find a lot with product design as well is it's just like, user research is great and everything if you're a big established company and you have the resources to do so. But most of the decisions you make are just common sense. And, some people would call it intuition, but it's not. It's just like users are familiar with patterns and stuff and ways of doing things, and you just need to like follow those. And then down the track, if you want to do more research, you can like tweak things and make it better. So I kind of followed that similar approach with Untitled when I was building it. So looked at what the most successful products in the market were, and like purchased a couple of them and pulled them apart, and you kind of just take bits and pieces from all of them. Like, oh, I really like how they structured this one, how they've broken it up into application components and marketing components as separate rather than melding them all together. So, you know, this product's successful. That obviously works. I really like it. That resonates with me. And that's a good enough validation for me to like take that approach. And then, you know, down the track, if people are like, oh, I hate how it's set up like this, then you can change it, right? That's kind of a way of user testing, is just product feedback. And then in terms of like what is actually included in the kit, I kind of try to cover all bases, but most of the decisions just came out of personal necessity. So these are the things that I needed when I was like setting one up for my previous job and when I'm setting one up for Himalayas. So if I'm going to need them for these relatively simple products, then chances are other people will as well. So I'll include them. And then, you know, when you pull it apart, other successful products, you might see that, oh, they've also included like a calendar component. You know, oh, I didn't think to do that, so I'll just include one. So it's just about like looking at what else has done really well and then taking inspiration from that and combining them into something even better and just building on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it does tell me one thing, that you are very true to the philosophy of learning from others and following the best practices, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. And
Yeah,
I can clearly see that it's not just the way that you design things, it's also like you use the same methodology while you're creating the whole product. And even from the very micro to macro level of things, I think that's how you make decisions, which is great. And that could be not said for a lot of people. We would like to talk. They would always talk about things like this, but when it comes to putting those words into action, it's quite difficult. And I can see that you clearly do that. So kudos to you on that.
thanks.
And can you remember or can you think of any struggles that you had while you were creating this? Any roadblocks that you must have gone through? Any troubles at all?
Yeah, well, like as I mentioned earlier on, it's just I kind of just approach it as like problem solving. So if I'm trying to build the table component, for example, and how that was set up was particularly a headache for me because I hadn't really set that up. Well, actually, I had at my previous job, but I'd set it up differently, and so I recognized that there were limitations for the way I was doing it at my previous job. Not to get too much in the weeds, but at my previous job, I'd set up the component library with tables as rows, and then using auto layout. But with Untitled UI, I went with a column approach as well, which has its pros and cons. But I must have rebuilt that whole component a dozen times and read a bunch of posts and blogs about it, best practices, and with every component in the library, just taking it one by one and figuring out, okay, there are a million different ways we can design this drop-down component, but these are some pretty acceptable like best practices. So I'm just going to try to like do as many of these as possible and then move on. I think in terms of like other problems I ran into a lot of technical problems with Figma just due to the scale of the kit, which is still like an ongoing problem. It's definitely gotten better. But yeah, a few bugs. I think I was kind of pushing it to its limits at some point. So I ran into a few bugs, particularly this really pesky bug that has only recently been solved called a ghost layers bug. And essentially what's been happening is I figured this out by mistake because I was actually using Untitled on a different project and I went through and deleted a bunch of components, but I noticed just by chance that the layer size didn't go down. And there's this bug that happens occasionally where when you delete components or instances of components, they still hang around in the background and they don't get cleared out by Figma the next time you refresh the page. So what happens is they accumulate in layers and like artificially bloat projects. So that was a real issue for me early on because that I discovered that, maybe halfway through the project. And yeah, it was pretty scary because I'd invested all this time into this project and then realized that this might be the death of it because I have been constantly iterating on this product and like going through and deleting components and redoing them. And all these layers have been building up in the background. So after like over a month back and forth with Figma's technical support, they managed to release a script that like clears them out. It forces Figma to clear out all these ghost layers. So that seemed to solve the problems. That was crisis averted. So
Well, you're such
yeah,
a powered user of Figma. The kind of problems that you're running into, I think only a person like you would run into because you are using it so extensively. And I think if Figma had a bounty program, you would actually make a lot of money out of that because you're just so using it so extensively that you're bound to bound to come across a lot of these bugs. And I think what you have created could also just be like a great starter for anyone who is starting to use Figma. And you know what I think? Figma should actually buy Untitled UI and give it as like a free kit, as a starter kit with the tool. And I think it is also going to increase the adoption of the tool. Not that I don't think they actually need a lot of that, like it's already the number one tool, but having resources like this and having like a rich library is obviously going to be very useful to them.
Yeah, they have some really amazing resources, like their education team and the designers that they hire to make their resources are absolutely incredible. So if that's one of the things I love about Figma as well, is they have like getting started guides that are out of this world, rivaled only by Webflow. Webflow education is next level as well. I don't think I deserve any kind of bounty. I just hope that, now that Figma has solved this bug, that it doesn't become a problem with somebody else as well, for other large teams building large component libraries. I think they've paid me in spades by the amount of pesky emails I sent them. So I'm really happy that we could get it sorted. And apologies to anyone who had to deal with me at Figma at that time, because it was really frustrating, as you can imagine, like running into these problems and having a lot of your work kind of had to get thrown out.
Yeah. And you have been using Gumroad to sell the product, right?
Yep.
I'm wondering what are the strategies that you have actually used to sell the product, or have you used any strategies at all? I think a product like this, maybe it's just like a standout success. I think a lot of people are also organically following it, and I know that you have also done some affiliate partnerships, but I'm also curious to understand if you have used any other sales strategies.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I see a lot of like advice around just get started, and I think Rob Hope was in one of your other interviews I was listening to. He was talking about, hey, you just have to create a Gumroad profile to get started, and that's true. Like it's so easy to like get started and sell a product, but I do think that you should really take your time and do it properly. Otherwise, it has a higher chance of just fizzling out. So, what I mean by that is taking the time to create heaps of marketing assets. Like I had created the video for Untitled myself as well, which was incredibly painful. Like I absolutely hate After Effects. It's my arch nemesis. But you kind of got to go through those motions. Otherwise, you're putting your own product at risk because you're not launching it properly. Same with the marketing side as well. You want to make your marketing site as good as possible. And one of the things that I don't agree with, that I see a lot of other digital creators focus on, is social media. So social media kind of like at the mercy of their algorithm and how much reach you get promoting your product. Whereas having a great website and solid SEO, then that is much more sustainable. And most of the traffic to Untitled UI actually comes from SEO and from Google. If you search best Figma UI kits, like Untitled's up there on the first page. I think it's like a second result or something. So made sure from the start that I knew what keywords I wanted to target, and made sure that everything was set up and ready to go, and the marketing site was as good as I could make it to kind of answer all those questions that people are searching for as well. So yeah, I guess my advice to that end would be, don't focus too much on like making noise in social media, because that's all it is. It's just noise. People might see it for a second, but when people are actually searching for UI kits, they're searching with intent. They're looking for a UI kit. If someone sees you promoting your product on Twitter, they're seeing it amongst a feed of thousands of other tweets, and they're not actively looking for your product at that moment, if that makes sense. So yeah, I made sure that was a focus right from the start, making sure like I had all the marketing assets and collateral ready to go. The website was up. And then funnily enough, this sounds a bit contradictory, but I accidentally launched it on Twitter. If my co-founder at Himalayas, one of my co-founders at Himalayas, Arby, suggested that I tweet out a free version with kind of like a little bit of a bait and switch tweet. So if you go to my Twitter profile, you can see my pinned tweet. I teased that I was working on this UI kit. It's the first time I'd mentioned it to anybody except for like 3 people, and that I am releasing like a free version of the kit. And at that time, the free version was already on Figma community. That was one of the marketing assets that I'd prepared. I prepared like basically a slimmed down version of the kit and released it for free to kind of people to find the Figma community. And that's part of it because people are searching for stuff in the Figma community, and that content is there forever. Whereas on Twitter, it's there for a moment and then it's gone. Anyway, sent this tweet out at like 5 p.m. End up having to stay up all night because the tweet kind of blew up, and people were replying and retweeting it and stuff, and end up getting retweeted like 1,000 times or something, or 800 times. I can't remember. And then it kind of just took off from there. And because the site, it was a brand new domain name, the site didn't have a whole domain authority, but with increased traffic, people start to trust you a little bit more. So then within a week or so, I started to see my keywords started to rank. So then I started writing a little bit of content on the site as well to kind of like signal to Google that, hey, this site knows what they're talking about. They're getting lots of traffic, and really like capitalizing on that opportunity. So that was a really big like kickstart. The last project I launched, goodbooks.io, I launched on Product Hunt, and I took the same strategy, made sure everything was absolutely set up, and then leveraged the site traffic from Product Hunt to really kickstart the SEO cycle and really make it stand out in terms of Google. So they start, ranking all their pages, and I started getting backlinks right from the start. So yeah, follow that kind of strategy, and then really focused on investing heavily in SEO from there. So making sure all pages were optimized as they could be. I made a whole separate landing page for the free version. So when people search for free Figma UI kit, it also shows up as well, rather than just Figma UI kit. In terms of other strategies, I do a daily post where I share a design from Untitled UI on Twitter. And the thing is, it looks like a lot of work, but all I'm doing is just taking example pages that are already in the UI kit and restyling them slightly. So changing the colors and the typography, and then making them in a dribble shot and then sharing them. And I literally have like 3 months of those just scheduled in Buffer, ready to go. So I don't have to worry about that. And then every time it gets close to the end of the queue, I just go in and add more.
And that I can say is such a fine strategy. Like you've done such a nice job at content marketing, because what you are actually doing with that is that you are consistently posting it on Dribble and Twitter. And the best part about it is that you're actually showing people how you could create things by using Untitled UI. So you're making things on top of that. And that's the best way you can sell something, right? You can show people how you can create something using the kit. And it also helps with like there are enormous benefits of consistency. So people who know me, they know that I'm very big on consistency. And the second thing is also that you are always top of mind. Like a lot of times, some people might have not seen your work, and maybe what you posted on day number 87 was something that people saw, and they came across your UI kit and they bought it from there. And also, the other way that it works out is that when you keep on sharing that with people, people take some time to make that decision, right? Like first time I see it, I got excited, but then I got distracted and maybe I didn't buy it. The second time I saw it, I was like, wow, it's nice, but I'm not sure if I want to buy it or not. And there would come a time where the timing would be just right. Like when I see it in front of my eyes and it's exactly what I need. And I might also just have my credit card or debit card with me, and I would just make that purchase. So constantly seeing that is also very useful. And I think this content marketing strategies that you have done is very beautiful. And that tweet that you talked about, which kind of blew off, and where you were offering the free marketing, the free version of the UI kit, that's actually how I discovered Untitled UI for the first time. So it definitely worked for me
awesome.
at least.
You're one of the OGs right from the start.
Yeah. So what is next on your mind? You have been. I recently saw that you shipped out a new update of Untitled UI, and you're constantly working on Himalayas. So by the way, great work on that as well. I spent some time checking that website, and I think I'm actually going to create a profile for Graph CMS on that site.
Awesome.
We are also a fully remote company, and we we are growing quite significantly and we have a lot of open roles, and I think it would be great to have GraphCMS showcased on Himalayas or app with a company profile. So I'm going to take a look into that. What is next on your mind apart from all these things that you're doing? Are you also working on something else?
I am working on a little something else, but I can't really talk about it just yet, unfortunately. My main focus is Himalayas, so trying to make that as great as it could be. Himalayas, a job board is an original idea. There are a few remote job boards on the internet that are hyper successful. But if you've used them before, that's not a great experience, both for job seekers and employers as well. So we're confident that we can do a better job than that. And it will take some time. Like, it is a chicken before the egg problem, because you need traffic, job seekers to come to the site to encourage employers to post jobs. And then it goes around in a circle because you need employers to post jobs to encourage traffic. And when you have established players in the market, it sometimes can be very hard to break in because, they have the traffic already. The experience may not be great, but employers don't care too much about that because they're actually getting views in their jobs. So we recognize that, and we're working very hard on Himalayas to kind of make it as great as it could be. And, hopefully over time, Google will reward us, and we're already starting to see us grow organically, like 60% month to month. And yeah, it's really exciting because, it's a fight that we eventually will win if we just keep being consistent and showing up every day, as you spoke about. Other than that, yeah, I'm working on an update to Untitled UI, as I alluded to before, just doing I'm not sure what to call it yet, maybe like a light version, where it's the exact same, ultimate UI kit, but I've just gone through and removed, maybe you don't need all the footers in 4 different colors. So now it's just like you have a white version of each footer and then like a dark mode version of each footer. So going through and trying to strip out as many variants as well without taking away value from the kit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
if people want to know what is the next thing that you're working on and they want to be the first to find out, what should they do? Where should they follow you?
Bandwidth constraint at the time. I think maybe just follow me on Twitter, and then when it's ready, I'll just post it on there, I guess. But yeah, definitely sign up to the Himalayas newsletter as well, because we've got some pretty cool stuff in the works.
Yeah, I've already seen it. I think the work that you're doing there is also great. And as you rightly mentioned, there are many remote job boards. Basically, everyone has a job board now. I'm also considering starting a job product disrupt. But the user experience that you have created with Himalayas is just great.
Thank you.
So I think you are going to make some good progress on that. I would like to ask one last question to you.
Sure.
What would be your advice to upcoming makers and creators?
Well, I mean, I've mentioned this a couple of times in terms of competition. So it is a very competitive space. A couple of years ago, not so much. And I feel like a lot of, even since I've launched Untitled, I've seen a few other competitors launch. Obviously borrowed a few ideas from Untitled in terms of the component library and everything, which is fine. It's totally fine. I welcome competition, but what a lot of them fail to realize is that, people can preview UI kits and dig into them and make an informed decision. It's not like selling a product at, a local market or a shopping center where consumers only really have one choice. On the internet, there are infinite choices. So you need, if you're going to be a creator on the internet, you need to make sure what you're selling is the best, if that makes sense, or at least good enough to compete with the best. Otherwise, they're just going to steal all your sales, and you'll get disheartened because you're not making any sales. But the proper approach should be to invest in your product and make it as good as it can be, so you can actually compete on that global scale. I know that sounds like I'm simplifying it, and it's a lot harder to do than simply just stating it. But if you just consistently work at it until you're confident that it's at least 2x better than the competition, then your odds of success are going to be much higher, because people will eventually come across your product and realize it's a better option, and then just decide to choose you.
Yeah, that's a solid advice. And I think at least what you can do is you give your best effort. There are many other factors that will come into play when you compare it with other products, but what you can do and what you can control is that you can give your best, and which you definitely do. Thanks a lot, Jordan, for coming on the show and having this wonderful chat with me. For all the people listening to the show, thank you so much for staying till the end. All the links that we talked about, Refactoring UI, Untitled Kit, and some other resources that we talked about, those are going to be below in the description. So make sure that you check it out. And I'll see you on the next episode.